Hey guys, another day, another background photo, or painting rather, and a new short story from George R. R. Martin in the Thousand Worlds Book Club. Apologize, this is getting out fairly late. I've been sick the last few days, and I was hoping to wait until this sort of clears up on me because I didn't want to be coughing all the way through this, but Preston's been putting out videos now at a pretty prodigious rate, and I wanted to get this one taken care of just in case he had a new one coming up for the book club. So anyways, if I am coughing or sniffling throughout this, please forgive me. Let's get into this. This is Tough Voyaging #1. It looks like this is going to be a series of these short stories coming up here, and this is the first installment, including the prologue. And specifically about the prologue, for those of you who remember my review of Bitter Blooms, you may anticipate that I might speak negatively about the prologue, because it seems whenever George R. R. Martin has a character burying someone, there gets to be a lot of brooding and loathing and so forth that goes on. But I actually found the prologue to be very interesting in a different way than the actual story was, because it's talking about a lot of story elements that we've been discussing very much in the book club. And I was looking forward to seeing how that was going to come up in the story. So, it was interesting stuff for me in the prologue. And then, of course, George R. R. Martin goes on to actually make a pretty blatant exploration of these concepts that so far he's, kind of just been dangling in front of our noses. So it was interesting to follow this story and get into some of the nuts and bolts of this. And of course, as I was watching this, I was filing it all away in my head and coming up with all these ideas. And then Preston did his review video, and he, to his credit, he did a pretty thorough job of covering all the points where there's overlap between Tough Voyaging and the story of Song of Ice and Fire. So, he sort of stole that thunder a little bit. That's perfectly fine, but I don't want to be redundant, so I'm going to go off on just a couple points here that aren't specifically related to the story. There aren't major points, but it's sort of stuff that I've been picking up along the way in general, and just haven't really figured out a way to work it into any of my other reviews yet, because I tend to run fairly long anyways. So now is as good a time as any to bring them up, and the way they relate specifically to this story and a few others and the Song of Ice and Fire. So let's start out here. The first point has to do with my concept of the other, which I keep talking about, but which seems to keep popping up in these stories. And so this is just my introductory thought here. Almost immediately, once we get past the prologue, almost immediately the protagonists that we're introduced to in the main story, they start working in their own self-interest. They move the other protagonists into the realm of the other almost immediately. In fact, I think in the opening scene you can conclude that it does happen immediately, like it's already happened. The character that they open with is already working in his own self-interest. And as the plot continues, it sort of devolves into this, it's kind of like a Jurassic Park in space, is what I conceived of it as. It gets pretty hectic in there. It does make for very entertaining reading. And this is a very recurring theme with George R. R. Martin. Of course, the major one that I thought of from the book club so far has been A Greywater Station, where you have a few protagonists and eventually they all sort of devolve and start working on their own. It's sort of the same concept. And I wanted to lead this into the idea of individuals versus teams. And in modern society, and particularly in Western society, we place a large value on the individual. And it becomes part of our societal lore. And shows up in our storytelling. And I think probably the best example of this, or maybe it's just an easy example everyone can relate to, is the history of the American West. So when we talk about how the West was won, or the taming of the West, you'd think of these rugged individualistic types of characters like cowboys or mountain men or lawmen or what have you, that are going out and conquering and doing these things. But if you actually step back from that and take a more realistic study of history of the American West, it's pretty easy to conclude that it was really groups of people who were working together that actually changed the West fundamentally towards what it is today. And these are groups of pioneers that are going out and helping each other build their houses and building barns for each other and running fences and clearing fields, and then helping each other harvest their crops, or helping each other put out fires, or ponying up together to bring a school teacher out so their kids can get a school education. So, and it also applies. Let me go to a couple other examples here too. For example, in military history, you have the concept of the great generals like Alexander and Hannibal and Julius Caesar, and they get a lot of credit for being such great tacticians and strategists. And when really, if you step back and look at history, all of these guys have teams that they're working with of other generals and advisors and everything that are feeding them information. And of course, they get credit for being the leaders and bringing it all together. But it was really teams of people that are affecting what actually happened with these guys throughout their careers. Or another example would be in business. We have the concept of the self-made man. And there's people that get lots of credit, like for example, Bill Gates gets credit for Microsoft, and Steve Jobs gets credit for Apple, and Warren Buffett with Berkshire Hathaway. When if you step back and look at business from a real historical point of view and see how these guys did what they did, it was really teams of people, some of which were kind of maybe negatively affected by the success of these other ones. But it was really teams of people that were working together. And we're just giving these particular individuals the credit, possibly simply because they are becoming the wealthiest or whatnot. But I think it's pretty consistent throughout history. Any realm that you're looking at, any study, that it's really teams of people who are succeeding. You're not really finding individuals who are succeeding. Their teams. Success seems to be a team sport. So why don't we see more stories about teams if that's really the reality? I think, for one, just in general, they don't really make terribly interesting stories. I mean, if you're thinking about a group of pioneers going out on the prairie and settling down and just working really hard for years and years and years, it's not really that exciting. And I think the other idea is, in the face of complexity, we will tend to try to simplify the situation down until we arrive at a concept that's easy to understand, it's easy to grasp, and then we'll just rely on that. And in this case, that seems to be, well, rather than sitting and analyzing all these groups of people and the way that they worked as a team and everything, we'll just give the credit to one person, and that's an easy thing to grasp, and then we can move on. This point I'm going to come to here in a little bit. So keep that in mind. But I think overall, success as a team sport, it is something that, by and large, from what I have read, that's something that's lacking for George R.R. Martin in the stories that we've read so far in the book club, and also in A Song of Ice and Fire. We don't really see that a lot. We see a lot of individuals working in their own self-interest. And what does that mean, really, I guess, on a philosophical level? What does that mean for the stories? I think George R.R. Martin is a pretty intelligent writer, and he brings in a lot of very well-developed concepts and executes them throughout his stories. So my guess would be, I don't think he's simply doing this because it makes for easy stories or stories that sell. I think he really is doing this intentionally. I think there's something at play here. And I think if you look at Tough Voyaging or Greywater Station, the protagonists go out and act as individuals and not as a team, and then they don't succeed. And I think that's fairly true to life, at least the way I'm understanding teamwork, and hopefully I'm demonstrating here and defending my idea pretty well. I think the same can be said of A Song of Ice and Fire, where you have a tremendous amount of characters who are going out, and when you're examining their actions, they're really looking out for themselves, not really working as a team. I think probably the character that comes the closest to this is Danny, So far, out of all the protagonists, she seems to be the one that has the ability to really, kind of unite people in a common cause, and people are starting to come over to her side. Unfortunately, I'd say her weakness is that she's not really terribly good at taking their advice, so maybe while she has their support, she's not really utilizing it very well, at least not to the maximum potential. But I'm guessing at some point, at the end of this story, The Song of Ice and Fire, if there's ever going to be some kind of a positive resolution that comes out of it, I think it's going to be because some protagonist is going to finally figure out a way to get different groups of people to put aside their differences and work towards a common goal. So we'll see if that comes true. But that's the first point here. Second point, this is directly in response to a question that Preston asked, maybe rhetorically, but I'm going to try to answer it anyways. Haviland Tough, Preston asks in his review an interesting question. What makes Haviland Tough so special, essentially, that he should be the one to succeed at the end of the story while all the others fail? And, it's a question I didn't necessarily ask myself, but if I sit there and think about it, I guess there's a couple of ways that you could slice it. One, I guess if I'm being cynical, I'd say it's because Tough is a 7-foot-tall ailurophile pseudo-intellectual with a knack for strategy games and a ship named the Cornucopia of Excellent Goods at low prices. Because really, what author is going to kill off a character like that? You can kind of bet that that dude's going to survive. But really, if I'm being serious about this and put some thought into it, I think what really sets him apart from all the other ones is that he's the best at using his monkey mind. And this is referring to a neuroscience concept of different parts of the brain and how they function. To try to get through this quickly, there's a reptilian mind, which is very primitive and supposedly developed earlier during human development. It's very good at processing stimuli and coming to very quick decisions. And it works subconsciously on many levels. It's very vital for human survival in tactical situations. You'll find yourself reacting before your conscious brain is actually thinking about it and coming up with solutions. Your subconscious is already reacting and putting things into motion. So from a survival standpoint, the reptilian mind is very useful. Compare that to what they call the monkey mind, which is more advanced cognitive function. It handles rational thinking and evolved later during a primate stage. And the thinking that happens in the monkey mind, it involves more work. The brain has to actually work harder to come up with solutions when it's processing with the monkey mind. Both are extremely useful, but sometimes the reptilian mind can subvert the work of the monkey mind because the reptilian mind requires less work. And the classic example of this, oh, and by the way, if you're interested in these concepts, I'll throw a link to a book in the description of the video. Take a look at it. It's really fascinating stuff. But a classic example of this, and this has been around for a while, so you may have heard of it before, it's the example of a kid who goes to the store, and he buys a baseball bat and a baseball. Altogether, those two items cost $1.10. The ball costs the bat costs $1 more than the ball. And the question is, how much does the ball cost? And when you're first presented with this question, the reptilian brain looks at the numbers and comes to a fast decision, says the ball's 10 cents. Whereas the monkey mind is slower, it takes more work, and you have to actually have the discipline to sit down and think through the math, and you come to the conclusion, by the way, the correct conclusion is the ball costs 5 cents, the bat costs $1.05, with the difference being $1. And there have actually been studies done, brain mapping studies, for example, where they connect all the wires to your brain, and they sit there and you see on the screen, different areas of the brain light up when, different parts of the brain are engaged. When the reptilian mind is engaged, there's only a small portion of the brain that's actually lighting up. When you're engaging the monkey mind, a lot more of the brain is lighting up, and it's literally the brain has to do more work. It's burning more calories trying to use the monkey side of the brain to come up with rational answers. And so it's a very easy human tendency to try to ignore that and rely more on instinctive thinking, the reptilian brain, for example. But then again, as we've been talking about, the reptilian brain isn't always correct. So, what does neuroscience have to do with Haviland Tough? Well, I think Haviland, very consistently throughout the story, shows a strong ability to remain calm and project rational thought into very tense situations and reason out solutions to the problems. And probably to me, the example that stood out to me the most when I was thinking about this is there's a point in the story where he's in the cloning room and he's being attacked by a T-Rex. And this T-Rex is trying to bash through some kind of barrier. I think it's like a table or something. Haviland Tough is hiding underneath it. And Haviland knows that T-Rex isn't going to make it through. So he just sits there and he thinks about like a strategy for like a board game or something, some game that they were playing on the ship. He sits there and thinks about strategy and waits for the T-Rex to go away. And it's a tremendous example of him suppressing, the fight or flight instinct, which comes out of the reptilian brain. He's repressing that, and he's like, well, I'm stuck here, so let's get some productive thinking done. And he just thinks through stuff. So and he does this very, very consistently, and I think it's essentially his roadmap to success at the end of the story is that he is able to do this. And in this way, I think he really is a thinking man's hero, in that he has this level of self-discipline and ability to rely on his rational mind. So when we apply this as Song of Ice and Fire, and this is a really roundabout way to get to this point, so bear with me. Final point here, if you're applying this as Song of Ice and Fire, Preston asks this question, who's going to win? I think we can eliminate a lot of options, and Preston says this many times, that many protagonists very frequently, when they're pondering these situations and they're trying to figure stuff out, they very frequently come to the wrong conclusions. And I think that this is pretty intentional on George R. R. Martin's part. I don't think that he's just throwing out red herrings for the benefit of the story and to keep the readers guessing. I think he really is reflecting a reality of human neurology, and he's creating realistic characters. Probably the best example I can think of somebody who relies on their rational mind is Serial Pharrell. We know that other men were stronger, faster, younger. And why was Serial Pharrell the best? It's because of his ability to see, right? He calls it true seeing. And he tries to pass this on to Arya. And this is literally using your rational mind instead of letting your reptilian mind just kind of throw conclusions at you that are really easy to get to. You sit there and you actually think, and you realize, a rational conclusion for your situation. Unfortunately, he's sort of disappeared now from the story. He's probably the one that we see the most. Is Varys is another one. If someone's going to survive at the end and succeed, I'd probably say Varys is our best example that we get to see a lot. And maybe on top of that, Illyrio. We don't get to see Illyrio not nearly as much, but I think he exhibits some of these traits as well, and it's probably why they make Varys and Illyrio, they make a pretty effective team together. So I guess those are my two answers for Preston and his rhetorical questions. And that's about all I have on this one, guys. So we're looking forward to the next one, and thanks for watching. We'll see you guys later.